Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for joining me. I'm really, really delighted to be joined by Tomer Dotan-Dreyfus, who is a author and a Jewish activist for peace in Berlin, in Germany. Tomer, I'm really interested to speak to you. Obviously, the horror of the past few weeks, first the horror of October 7th, and then what's happened in terms of Israel's horrendous onslaught against Gaza. Can you just tell me, firstly, what's happened with protests for peace and opposition to Israel's onslaught in Gaza in Germany? What's the status?
Well, so there is the problem with the protests in Berlin is that, or in Germany, is that nobody really knows what's going on. A lot of people are getting detained for holding a Palestinian flag, for wearing a kafia, which are not symbols of Hamas, the terror organization, but are symbols of Palestinian identity. It is unclear. There are a lot of demonstrations that are being banned, not approved by the police, giving the police the full legitimation to disperse them. And there is a strong inconsistency about that. So, for example, there is a clear stance of Germany since years for this two-state solution, for example, but the Palestinian flag is the flag of one of those two potential states. So, are we against it now? So I think there is a very, very serious crackdown on any solidarity act with the Palestinians, with Gaza. But I'm more worried about the fact that there is no clear guidelines to that crackdown. And I don't trust the I don't trust policemen on the field, so to say, on the street, to do the right thing without any guidelines.
So the vast majority of protests in support of, I guess, or opposition to the Israel's onslaught on Gaza have been banned by the German authorities. But the German state would say, look, the German state was responsible for the greatest crime committed against the Jewish people in its history after 2,000 years of persecution in Europe, 6 million Jews murdered, 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population. And therefore, the German state has a responsibility, a duty to, as reparation to Jewish people, to protect a state which calls itself the Jewish state. And that's informing its position. That's, I'm trying to just explain. I guess that would be the general gist of the argument of the German state. What would your response be to that as a Jewish activist for peace?
Well, I definitely agree with that. I think we are also very much afraid as Jews in this country of certain things that are being said on the street, confusing Jews with Israel, for example, or calling for jihad and things like that. But they do make us scared, and this fear is valid. I think, though, that what we have to ask ourselves is whether this crackdown actually protects us or not. Germany is by far, I mean, as far as I know, in the West, the most aggressive country on Palestinian solidarity these days, and it is also the first country in which a Molotov cocktail was thrown in a synagogue. So, I don't know if these two things are connected. The Molotov cocktail incident wasn't even figured out. We don't even know who threw it yet. But I do know, partially because I am from Israel, Palestine, that violence initiates more violence on the other side, and so I'm not sure that I feel protected by this complete ban of demonstrations in solidarity with Palestine.
In terms of, before I ask you more about what's happening in Germany itself, I mean, as someone, as you said, with a heritage there back in Israel, how would you describe what you're feeling in terms of what's happening to Gaza right now and the justification for what's happening in Gaza?
Well, it's a huge tragedy. I don't know if anybody's actually has any interest in protection. As I said regarding the demonstrations in Germany, I think a very similar thing regarding Israel and Gaza. I I am shocked by the shallowness of the discussion around it. I hear way too many cliches that I feel are a bit empty of content. I'll give you just one example to explain what I'm talking about. Free Gaza from Hamas is a sentence we hear a lot these days, which I can stand behind. You know, the first victims of Hamas are the Palestinians. Back in 2007, when they threw their opposition from the roofs in Gaza. But is what Israel doing in Gaza right now frees it from Hamas? I'm not sure, to say the least.
Yeah. And in terms of, you know, I suppose the human impact and the way that's been justified. I mean, we've seen obviously thousands potentially of Palestinians being killed, and that's been justified on the basis of being an anti-Hamas operation. I mean, what's your thoughts when, in terms of Israel's justifications, I guess, and the way Germany itself, as other Western governments, is defending that onslaught on the basis of removing Hamas, but the many thousands of Palestinians who've obviously been killed.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to point at what exactly in this military operation is targeting Hamas. For example, cutting Gaza off electricity. I mean, it's a common knowledge in Israel and maybe elsewhere as well that Hamas people have their own generators that produce electricity. Cutting it off food supply and water, they have their own sources. Who is actually being affected by that? Now, I guess the argument that I'm not supporting here is that eventually it will be so bad in Gaza that they will just turn against Hamas and throw them out. I don't know if it's true. I think history proves us otherwise. I think usually when these things happen, something much worse comes along. We saw how Al-Qaeda was destroyed and ISIS was founded on the ruins of. So, yeah, I think a long-term thinking is very needed here. Not to mention the human price of the human life price of what's going on in Gaza right now. That, I mean, I'm a bit speechless about that. I don't know what to say about that. It's awful. And at the same time, you know, I would also obviously condemn the events on October 7th in the south of Israel, in which, you know, there's also a certain problematic to the demand that we will start every sentence with condemning that. I hope that's obvious that we're all condemning that and we can move on and talk about things that are happening right now.
Can you tell me a bit about how, in terms of the criminalization of Palestinian identity, you spoke a bit about that, and in terms of the role of the police and why, you know, could the police be trusted in terms of how they would say, well, we're doing this in terms of it's about stopping glorification of terrorism or whatever, but given the police in terms of who they support ideologically, the rank and file, and how that expresses itself in very racist ways?
Well, we know that the police in Germany has a far-right problem. There were in the past Telegram groups that were found to be circulating in the police with far-right ideas and symbols. The far-right in Germany is unfortunately very active. We had a National Socialist underground that was killing immigrants for 10 years without the police being aware of it, or even worse, with the police being aware of it. We don't know because the documents are sealed. We had a shooting in a synagogue 4 years ago in Halle. We had a shooting in a shisha bar in the city of Hanau 3 years ago. The far right is very active here, and one of the problems with the discourse at the moment is in Germany is the pushing of the responsibility for anti-Semitism and for Nazism even in this country onto immigrants, claiming this is imported anti-Semitism on the cost of dealing with actual incidents that are making the most of the anti-Semitic incidents a year in Germany, you know, coming from the far right. So we have a lot of far right in the police, and what we see now is that as part of this new way of dealing with the demonstration, they're sort of getting a carte blanche to do whatever they want in immigrant neighborhoods, in neighborhoods where there is a high percentage of immigrants. So, for example, it starts with detaining people for wearing a keffiyeh or holding a Palestinian flag, but it ends with policemen actually asking people for their papers. And this has nothing to do with fighting anti-Semitism, asking people for their papers. This is it's awful. We have politicians talking about denaturalizing now. I don't need to tell you when was the last time that Germany denaturalized people. And as somebody who was living here 11 years on visas until I finally got a citizenship, I think the concept of denaturalizing is awful and terrible and should not be on the table at all. And at the end of the day, it makes me also afraid for my future in this country, because all of those things are precedents. And if we think, I'm talking about we as a society in Berlin, if we think that those things will stay just, directed at the Palestinians, I think we need to think bigger than that, because those things, when those doors are opened, then you never know what comes through.
And just linked to that, finally, just the importance of those of us who obviously are standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people against a horrendous assault to always be vigilant and opposed to the menace, the real menace of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have ministers in Germany in certain states that were really expressing anti-Semitic ideas and stayed in their role because they claimed it was when they were younger that they said these remarks. And on the other hand, people are losing their jobs for Facebook posts in support of Palestine. So the imbalance of how I wouldn't even say different forms of anti-Semitism, because I don't think that being in solidarity with Palestine is anti-Semitic per se. But the imbalance of how the state is dealing with both those phenomenons does not make me as a Jew feel safe. It makes me feel like they're kind of throwing me under the bus, like our very valid fear of anti-Semitism is being exploited for a far-right agenda. And it also changes the discourse. It changes the way that people think and talk in Germany, because when these things are happening, when the chancellor, the chancellor of Germany, is coming from the Social Democratic Party, when he starts to talk like the far right, then people vote for the far right eventually, because all we hear about in the news is how immigrants brought us anti-Semitism into Germany. So I think I think we live in a very dangerous time in Germany, and if we don't figure out a better way to deal with those things, a better strategy, so to say, we are going to fall right into the arms of the far right.
Brilliantly put, Tom. I really, really appreciate you taking your time to speak to us about this. If you're watching, please like and subscribe. And thank you hugely to Tomer speaking to us from Germany.
Thank you for the invitation.